Nothing like it. The stream is live.
Welcome to the third episode of the New Stack Agents live stream, where we talk about all things AI, AI agents. Today we're joined by Antje Barth, developer advocate for all things Gen AI at AWS, and our good old friend and founder, Alex Williams. Thanks both of you for joining us today. First time we're doing this with 3 people, so we'll see how that goes. But Antje, where are you calling us from? It looks pretty nice back there.
Yeah, and first of all, thanks for having me here today. I am sitting in San Francisco, and I'm joining from our AWS Builder Loft here, right on Market Street.
So I feel like we need to step our production values looking at this point, Alex. We got to work on that. Antje, tell us a little bit about how you got to do what you're doing right now, because I know both of us were from Germany, came to the US, but after that, I think our paths diverged a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I moved here actually from Germany 4 years ago, and part of it just to be, in kind of the center for AI, working with startups here in San Francisco, working with the developer community. I get to come to this space here, the Builder Loft, a lot of times. We're hosting communities here to run workshops, meetups, and really kind of, show what you can do with AI, what you can build with AI. And it's really kind of an inspiring environment here in general in San Francisco, in the Bay Area at this time. And I think it's a unique time. It always been like, kind of the center of a lot of innovation here in the US, but agentic AI is kind of at a different pace at this moment.
Yeah, it's funny how that's changed, right? Because just a few years ago, everybody had written off San Francisco to some degree. And now seems like there's an AI meetup. Well, not just one, but multiple AI meetups every night.
Multiple. Yeah, it's like FOMO, right? Every day, every evening you can go to events, and it's like, which one do I go to?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you go to a lot of them?
I try to, yeah. I don't make like 10 a night, but I try to go to as many as I can.
So you only do 5 a night?
Yeah, maybe 2, right?
Wow. So when was the last one you went to?
Actually, just I think here in the loft just a few days ago. So there's always, if you can check out our calendar events page here. But there's so many things going on. We have a good mix of like sometimes venture capital startup events going on. A lot of times hackathons, workshops, and this is kind of really the type of activities I like and events I like, where developers come, and just build something together, test out new technologies.
That's maybe a good segue to talk about those technologies for a moment too there. Like what is it that your developers are most excited about right now in your view? What are you hearing as you go to those events?
I think right now it's a lot about making sense of building agentic systems. So we've done learning about, I think, and have a fair understanding of foundation models and text-based interactions. Now with this new era where we're trying to build agentic systems and potentially even, like multi-agent systems, I see a lot of excitement and curiosity in that space. Like, what are the tools, what are the frameworks, what are the protocols to use to make this a reality? And kind of moving from, local kind of maybe deployment and testing on my laptop to maybe building an app, especially here, with so many startup founders around. What can I build next, and how do I integrate that, and getting ready to then scale it to a production environment?
Yeah, that's a question a lot of developers, I think, are facing right now. The age of experimentation is kind of over to some degree, maybe, I don't know, but people really want to put these systems into production at this point, and that's a real challenge, I think. Like
that seems to be really been the approach you all have taken, at AWS, is like you're trying to really appeal to those people who want to experiment and, with very simple templates. Would you characterize it as that or something more?
I think if you look at the whole software development lifecycle and building applications, right, there's certainly like a huge amount that goes into how can I experiment and prototype quickly, right? Startups these days, and AI helps in that tremendously, where I can just, use one of those tools, describe in natural language to some extent, like what I want to build, like putting ideas into and creating code and putting ideas into projects. So this fast prototyping experimentation is really kind of creating so many kind of MVPs these days, which is exciting. And then the next step is obviously helping those startups, helping the developer communities to then take the next step and help them, hey, now that I have a prototype, how do I scale that? How can I onboard customers? So this is really the journey where we're here to help customers, developers, and startups and companies at any size, really.
Talk to us a little bit more about that, right? What if I think about, the competition, everybody else out there, seems to be the game right now. How can we do that? What is AWS doing right now in that space to get there?
Yes, we're meeting developers wherever they are, right? So we have a lot of tooling available. If you want to start building in your IDE, just explore prototyping. We have Amazon Q Developer, which is an AI assistant that you can have in your IDE. There's also Q Developer CLI, so that brings the agentic experience into your CLI experience, into the terminal, which is super powerful. You can just chat with it. You can say, hey, help me. What was this command in GitHub that I just forgot to roll back my last commit or something? Also, everything that you have access to in the CLI, for example, your AWS environment CLI commands. So you can just use natural language, say, hey, list me the content of my S3 folder in this region or something. So it really kind of makes it more natural to interact with a lot of like tooling and helps you kind of almost also to learn. So we see a lot of like developers that want to tap maybe into learning something new, exploring, using tools like QCLI to then learn and, build with that. And then obviously also more advanced use cases where it helps you to develop code, write files, review files for you, code bases. And then also as you're building, not just how you build, but what you're building. If you're looking into building agentic applications, there's a whole stack available. For example, with Amazon Bedrock, which is our fully managed service that offers a variety of foundation models available through a single API, and additional tooling, whether it's guardrails, helping you to build agents, evaluations. So really kind of giving you a stack. And then obviously, if you're kind of an expert and want to customize more and have more flexibility, there's a whole broad and deep set of services and capabilities, not just in AI, but basically everything AWS offers in this space, whether it's, data and hosting and infrastructure down to, individual maybe instances compute if you want to self-host. So really kind of the whole stack of flexibility there.
Talk to us a little bit more about QCLI, because that seems to be a trend right now that, a lot of, not just AWS, but there's been Gemini CLI, obviously Cloud Code, all of those run in the CLI. Why has that become such a popular model, you think?
I think a lot of it is due to the fact that all those agentic experiences come to where you work, right? So rather than me going out like in the past, when I had to look something up, I had to leave my IDE, I had to leave my terminal environment, look for documentation, and it's suddenly opening up another context for me, right? Another browser window, looking for stuff. Now with those technologies coming into the UX environment that we are operating in anyways, it helps me to focus on the task, right? And I don't have to actively go out anymore. I have this AI assistance and I can just ask the questions like, hey, help me doing this. It's almost like I have my, personal tutor sitting next to me and helping me to find the information.
It's about that flow.
And yeah.
It's about that flow that the developer really wants. And, giving that experience in the CLI itself then helps provide that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can stay in my flow as I'm developing, check for also if I have an error, just, hey, help me troubleshoot this, right? And then getting tips and tricks and maybe directly the root cause and fix to apply.
Back in the day, AWS had, what was it, Cloud9, I think, right? The IDE that's doesn't exist anymore, I think, but that seems to be like almost a shame, because that would be the right place for a tool like that at this point, wouldn't it? So.
I see virtually, I think, AI coming into all of the experience we have, right? And also, like, it's not just in the developer space, right? Like, even like in different areas of the business. If you're a data analyst, for example, all of those UIs, dashboards, right, will have those AI capabilities, already have them built in, so you can use natural language. And, we famously say English has become the new programming language, coined by Antje Barth. But like, it is a reality, right? Like, natural language is kind of the new input that we use to interact with a lot of tools, and not just in the in the software developer space, but also like touching virtually every aspect of a business.
So for a developer who's like thinking about, using any of your peers, technologies for, let's say, agentic AI in particular, why AWS? What makes it such a slam dunk for AWS for a developer?
At AWS, we're going to meet developers where they are. We do have the broadest and deepest set of capabilities. One very important aspect is also reliability and security. So that's a big topic, of course, building and developing with AI. So, for example, as you're building those applications, you want to put guardrails in place, right? You want to be sure that you are building in an environment that you control, where you're in control of where the data lives, and you can put also like additional safeguards in place. And we do offer those, so developers can build safely and securely on AWS. For example, if you're looking in building and working with models, there is, for example, in Bedrock guardrails that you can apply that help you both like from the input side when you're sending inputs to prompts to the models and applications, but also on the output side. Tooling that helps you to mitigate factual errors from hallucinations. Another big topic. We introduced, for example, automated reasoning checks, which is not a new approach, but like new in applying automated reasoning, which we have been using in many different areas and products already for a long time. But applying this concept, a mathematical concept, to the world of generative AI to really have like mathematical checks that can detect if there's a factual error that stems maybe from hallucination, and you can stop it right there and correct before you give a response to the end user.
And you brought up Bedrock, and we do have a question in the chat here about strands and Bedrock, but maybe it makes sense to maybe go back to strands for a moment before we get to that question. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit, because strands is kind of a different approach to building. The Strands SDK is a different approach to building agents, right? Maybe you can talk about that a little bit. Kind of where does that come from, and what does that enable?
Happy to, yes. And I touched already like on the stack from AWS who are working in the AI space, building AI applications. Another big part is the open source community. And open source is super important to AWS, to our customers, and really the world. And just a couple months ago, we released Strands Agents SDK. If you haven't checked that out yet, everyone who's listening and watching, have a look. Just go to strandsagents.com, and you can also find it on GitHub. It's an open community, and it's actually a fun story how it originated. Our internal product teams have been building those agentic experiences, products, like, for example, Amazon Q Developer CLI. And while they're building those agentic experiences, they figured that it takes, in the past, a lot of like extra code to provide the structure and the guardrails, right, to get to the output you want to get to. Now, with the foundation models and the reasoning models really becoming so powerful, they noticed that you don't have to put that much, instructions around it anymore in code. You can really give way more agency to that model to plan and reason through the tasks and decide the right set of actions. So it's actually originating from an internal project. So internally, they build Strands agents to help them develop. And it's a fun thing. So Amazon Q Developer CLI, like, have a guess how long it took to develop and ship that? Is it months? Is it weeks?
You told me a few weeks ago, so I'll let Alex answer that question.
answer that
Yeah.
question about?
Yeah, like what do you think? How long did it take to develop
Um,
Amazon Q Developer CLI?
Well, gosh, I don't know. The pace is so fast now. 10 weeks.
3 weeks.
Well, I wasn't that off. I mean,
So yeah, I mean, yeah, as you said, the speed of innovation right now, and it's really about, like executing fast and shipping products fast. So thanks to Strands agents, they were able to cut down development times, from month to just weeks.
that I find intriguing also because you really relied a lot on model context protocol in the development of Strands, didn't you? Did that help speed the development at all? Because it did provide a lot of then integrations that you normally would not have.
It is supported and naturally embedded, yes, with Strands agents. So you can, as you're developing your agentic applications, right, you can connect with MCP to give it access to tools. And that's actually also just another fun story. Like if people are wondering, why did you call it Strands agents, right? I get that question a lot from developers. So we actually let the AI decide and pick its own name. And it came up with strands, and think about the 2 strands of DNA that connect the 2 parts of an agentic system, the model and the tools. And this is how the name originated. And yes, so you can use MCP to connect to tools, which makes it really powerful to connect to probably like tens of thousands of available MCP tools that are out there in the meantime. We do have built-in tools as well. So the most, commonly used things, whether you want to manipulate files locally or something, you want to attach memory to the agentic experience, and a ton more multimodal capabilities, a deep thinking capability where you can just, instruct it to reason and iterate a little bit more and think more. And a ton of those tools are built in already, and then you can connect with our MCP to make it even more, powerful.
So you can scale.
Absolutely, yes.
And so, then it can be a lot more expensive.
You can start local, and that's the great thing about it, right? So for example, if you're just getting started and you want to build an agent and prototype, and you don't want to you don't have the need to scale immediately, you can start locally. So Strands agents can be deployed anywhere. So on your laptop, you can start building an agent. You can use Ollama. So it's not only supported with, for example, what many might think with Amazon Bedrock models. You can integrate custom model providers. We do have already integrations as well with Meta, who integrated the Llama API with Anthropic for the Claude API. We have OpenAI support. We have light LLM integration, so you can virtually include any other model providers as well. So really powerful. Start local, keep cost in check, and then as you're developing and scaling, you can then tap and grow as needed.
And we should talk about cost a little bit, but let me get back to the kind of the original question here about Strands and kind of the overall ecosystem, because the question from the audience here was Strands SDK or Strands agents versus Bedrock agents and other tools that AWS offers around building agents. How do you think of that? Because I think it's always been the case that AWS had just a lot of flexibility, but it also led to some complexity because people didn't always know what tool was the right tool to choose. How do you think of that in the context of agents now and Strands specifically? Where does that fit into the overall ecosystem there at AWS?
It's about giving developers the choice, right? There's a lot of people who want to start with open source tooling that where Strands agents fit in. They can come together as a community, develop it, integrate, and then also there's developers, there's companies that looking for a more managed solution. This is where Amazon Bedrock agents come in. So Bedrock agents does already a lot of the heavy lifting of integrating stuff to, deploying agents. That's an important part. So you can easily, through the managed service, just connect knowledge bases, for example, data sources to your agent. You can do it programmatically through the API, but you can also do it in the AWS console if you prefer more UX and nice driven, easier way to build something with a few clicks. You can integrate, tool function use there, and then with a couple of clicks deploy it and run it, and then integrate it to your application. So think about it. With Bedrock, you have a managed solution that takes a lot of that work up for you versus, if you prefer to have the flexibility and you want to customize and just be maybe like trying out different things, you can start with Strands Agents as a full open source project.
And that's also a different persona of developer, I would guess, who chooses one or the other, right?
It might also just be use cases or like, natural evolution of like you're starting out to play around somewhere just to get, maybe some hands-on. Developers love to just, explore things, build things. And then at one point you might have maybe a different project where you say, oh, this is clearly defined and I just want to have a managed solution, that takes all of that heavy lifting of a lot of that code and does it for me. But I think for a learning exercise, especially for developers, when I tap into new technologies, I want to build it myself, right? I want to build it. I want to break things to understand like what do I have to pay attention of. So I think it's also a great way to start learning.
For sure. Since you said that, I kind of have to ask almost, like, what have you built with Strands SDK so far?
I was actually just a couple of weeks ago at a conference, and we were demoing a tabletop game, just to have something fun at the conference, at the expo floor. And we built together with colleagues a demo that is showing like tabletop game players that are individual Strands agents with different personality, character. One was kind of like the game instructor, one was kind of giving some tooling to the game, and then we had a couple of different players in there. And that was a really powerful demo because you could show how to build multi-agent systems in a fun way. And then the agents were communicating. We haven't talked about that, but using the agent-to-agent protocol to discover who is there, who is playing, and also the capabilities they have. And then we also integrated MCP to give those individual agents access to specific tooling. For example, we had one game agent that was able to roll a dice, right, for specific moves. So that was kind of a more on the fun side of things to build.
Through this education, that people are going through, developers have for a long time relied on a API first approach. And that's changing to some extent with natural language, with the English language becoming such a key aspect of generative AI. And I'm curious about how you approach that conundrum the developers face when they've been developing APIs and working with APIs for so long. And now they have to think about other alternative ways for interfacing with the generative AI environment.
It's a really interesting topic to me. And if you look like what we've been building over the last years and almost decade, right? We went from having websites as kind of the main interface for humans to explore. We went into the mobile era, and we went into the web services era, microservices era, right? And these days, it is kind of like, how can we move now from the web services into building agentic services? And not all of that is new, right? I mean, we have all those existing applications that companies build, and we have those APIs. But I think the next challenge here is how can we help companies, developers to participate in a world where maybe not the agents are browsing, my applications, my services. Sorry, it's not the humans browsing it, it's now agents, right? So, which is a super interesting topic. If you look at, we have Amazon Nova Act in research preview, which basically helps, navigate browser interfaces if you give it a task. So, for example, like help me book a hotel, or help me look for, maybe a restaurant somewhere, and you can see how those models that are trained to navigate interfaces that were originally designed for humans to navigate in helping to achieve tasks. So I think this is a super interesting topic that is in active research right now, and we can see the first glimpses. But yeah, taking that to the next level, I think this will be a super exciting future where we need a lot of developers to help us build those experiences.
And it's also a different challenge for building like a hypercloud like AWS, because once the user goes from an API or a human user even to these models, that does also change, I think, how you build a lot of those systems, I would think, but I don't know how you think of that.
It's an interesting field, yeah. A colleague of mine from our AGI team at Amazon gave a talk about this, super interesting. And because a lot of those interfaces, UXs, have been designed, as you say, right, for humans, for us to navigate, where we have icons and text. Now imagine, right, a model is navigating that environment and a pop-up comes up. So there's going to be a lot of things probably to redesign and think about just, if the future is agentic calls every interaction, like how can we make this the best experience for the models, for the agents, to really help them achieve the task in a good way.
And that really services a lot of questions about deterministic systems versus probabilistic systems, doesn't it? And how you think about, gosh, all kinds of different personas who are participating now in across the software supply chain. And we have people who are focused on DevOps, but now data operations is becoming far more, has become very important. And that brings in the question of agents, because with the ability kind of, think about these new OLTP databases, for instance, it makes it more efficient for agents to do that work. So there's all these different types of thought processes that you all must be going through when you're thinking about those developers and how they're adjusting and adapting to these new environments.
Yeah, and we can see the first steps towards that future already happening, right? With agentic AI, with protocols that are emerging, open protocols like MCP, the Model Context Protocol, and agent to agent. We're big supporters of the open protocols. As AWS, we joined the steering committees. A2A just recently moved to the Linux Foundation, which we're excited about. And we're actively contributing to the projects. We have dedicated engineers there and engaging and also sharing best practices, how to build, right? How to include security best practices in those protocols, which is a very important topic that is being discussed right now as well. As you're exposing your existing services, right, through, for example, as MCP tools, and we see those MCP servers being created, and suddenly, developers get excited and we're including them. So obviously authentication, authorization, security in this space, super important. And we're thrilled to work with the community across those open standards and protocols to build towards that future.
Where do you think developers are facing the hardest challenges right now when they want to build agents? And also maybe where do you see them make mistakes when they do that? And maybe that's the reason they face those challenges.
I think a lot of challenges come from building systems that can work at scale, because there's so much more to consider than, getting something up and running locally on your laptop, which is great to start learning. But then at one point, if you're building a system and you need to, whatever, the number of end customers you have, scale to millions. We saw this in the early stages with MCP. It started out with just supporting standard I/O, right? So it was supposed to run locally on your laptop, forking a process and connect your client there. And then in April, MCP added support for streamable HTTP to now, have like a remote server capability to connect to, what we need to build scalable agentic applications. So I think a lot of that is still like by many developers being explored and experimented with. And definitely as you're thinking around building those multi-agent systems, which at one point I think we will end up having, right? You can just scale a single agent with the capabilities so much. So at one point, the next level is to, hey, how does this one agent communicate with another agent? And it might be internally in your company, but it might also in the near future be then, hey, how do I communicate with an agent from another company, right? Like if you're thinking about different services that are offered in the industry. So building those systems, there's a lot of things to consider, right? One is obviously, how do I reduce latency, right? As you imagine, every call to a model, every call to another agent, it's a compound effect, right? So how do I optimize systems at scale? It's a super interesting topic, and a lot of techniques you can apply there, right? Like in general, parallelizing is one of the top, I think, recommendations. So don't work it out sequentially. If you can have a couple of agentic calls, model calls, whatever you need to do in the system in parallel, that helps. And caching techniques. So a lot of things are not brand new. Like we know about caching, right? We know about parallelization. It's just reapplying those concepts to this agentic world and rethinking maybe what systems do we need, what individual components do we need. But I think those are pretty much right now the challenges I see being discussed in a lot of developer communities, how to make this scalable system really kind of, production ready. And this is where we're here at AWS as well, helping companies and developers to succeed.
If you look ahead a little bit, and it's always so hard right now in this world, it feels like everything is changing every 2 weeks, 3 weeks by the day. But kind of what are you most excited about right now as you're thinking about AI and agents?
I'm excited about the pace of innovation, which is still going strong, right? And I do think we're still at the very first beginning only, right? Like there's still so much to explore, so much to rebuild, so many new technologies and breakthroughs coming. So for me, I love that, right? Like that's why I'm in this job. That's why I'm here in San Francisco as well. We're at the very beginning. So everyone, like, now is the best time. If you haven't started looking into agentic AI, everyone listening here, now is the best time, right? We need to kind of help also each other, right? There's a lot of things AI helps with is also democratize who can be a builder. So I see a lot of people coming to events, to meetups that are kind of just now starting. And AI made it easier for people to start building as well. So I think it's also like an opportunity for all of us in the space to come together and help others to start building, share knowledge as well about how to do that, and pitfalls to avoid as well, and sharing best practices, and then helping go from this current agentic AI world into the future, which might be like on the computer use side, might be in multimodality things, which might be how do we scale agents further. And this is really what excites me, like this opportunity space of what's coming and what's ahead of us.
I hear you about the excitement for advancement and and the age-old Silicon Valley thinking, or technology communities thinking about moving ahead and moving forward. But now we face different conceptual frameworks that we have not had to recognize before, in particular around hallucinations and the security issues that come with making your financial systems accessible by accident, or data deletion, or how you're communicating external communications from the model itself. So I'm wondering how you think about that trade-off in terms of that wanting to just keep moving forward, but the real kind of inherent risks that come with that with AI, and how developers should think about that.
I do think a lot of those security and trust topics, they're super important. We address them, we solve them in the enterprise, right? So I think it's also kind of a threat modeling, threat analysis side to it. So if I'm within my enterprise, within my company, I have built my application securely, I need to make sure, and I touched briefly on it, right? With new technologies coming in like MCP, there is this excitement, but we as a whole, as an industry, we're working together in establishing concepts. Like, for example, we recently contributed to the MCP June standard updates, especially around authentication, right? Where we're bringing those best practices that we've learned from building securely, safely into this new agentic world. In this case, especially, supporting the OAuth authentication model with MCP, and kind of having a segregation of concerns there with having a separate dedicated authorization server with MCP now, and the MCP server just, focusing on the task of validating the access tokens here. So there's a lot of like best practices that we can help bring into those communities and helping into that new agentic space. And it's many times reapplying familiar concepts to make sure then end-to-end those systems are secure and are safe.
Yeah, a lot of regularly it comes up that people tell me, oh, I wish we could just take a break for 3 months in model development and just focus on all the tooling that we're building around this right now, so we can make sure safety, security, all of those topics are addressed. But I don't think we'll see that anytime soon.
And it needs to be really kind of the day one thing to consider, right? Like security, safety should not be a build on to whatever I'm building. So on one side, yes, we are all excited about the technology. And then as we're building production applications, we obviously from day one have to consider and really evaluate, like, how do I embed this with my existing technology stack, right? And with my existing security frameworks that I have established, especially also, like, if you look at regulated industries, etc. So we are really at the beginning here, but I also feel very optimistic that we can solve this together.
It makes it a time, in my view at least, for advancements in security tools, for they do struggle with these different types of attack vectors.
And a big part of that is traceability as well, observability, right? That's been a big discussion in the agentic AI space too, right? I have my agents, I'm calling models. Where do I see if something goes wrong? Where does it go wrong, right? So as you're building those systems, it's really critical to also have traceability, observability built in from the beginning. And then you have that lock and you can check what's happening there. Yeah.
It's funny, right? We built all these tools for the cloud native ecosystem, observability, traceability. I talked to a company called Open LLMetry that uses the Open Telemetry project, to do that kind of traceability for models. It feels like we've got all the pieces at this point to do that, right? I think it's just a question of actually using them in the right way in this new reality for these
and
models.
adapting them, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Needs. Yeah.
Which is funny because there was a lot of startups, I think, that tried to make a go in the cloud native ecosystem and couldn't quite make it, or just kind of survived, but now found a niche in AI to actually just do that. So it's kind of interesting times for them too, I think. Alex, any final questions from your side before we go too far over time here?
Yeah, I guess my last question really is about, who do you recommend developers go to for AI ML security expertise? Because these implementation risks are huge, but the outcomes are really interesting too. And is that something that you're trying to educate people about? And where would you recommend developers go for that type of information?
Yeah, if it's in the open source space, in the open protocol space, we do have those discussions in the steering committees and in the communities. So developers can check that out, both for MCP and we're starting the work with A2A as well. And then in addition to that, if developers, companies are building on AWS, please reach out to us. We do have a lot of help that we can offer in making sure you're building securely and safely. We do have a GenAI Innovation Center that works with customers in prototyping and establishing those solutions. We do have an extensive partner network as well that can help and consult. So I would just encourage everyone, if you're building on AWS, reach out to us. If you're building in the open source space, reach out to the community, start the discussions if they haven't happened yet. And in a lot of places, those are active, ongoing discussions. Again, MCP, we just had a great progress there with the last spec update. And now we need the community as well to come together to help implement that.
I guess the last question I would also have is, what's next for Strands then? What's coming up?
Yeah, the team is currently working heavily on the A2A support for Strands. So just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we released a first part, the A2A server support. And I think the full A2A spec support is coming shortly. They just released also support for building towards asynchronous agents. So that's another big topic, right? We discussed how can I optimize things, and there might be longer running tasks that I don't need to wait for, that I can just, fire off an asynchronous job as well. So there's a lot of work going on in that space. And yeah, it's a public roadmap, so I'd encourage everyone to join us. It's an open community, again, on GitHub. And if you haven't done it, test it out and start building a Strands agent.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Antje. I think that's a wrap for us for today, but thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate that.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very
Absolutely.
much.
And
thanks, Frederic, for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Alex.
I mean, I invited myself, but regardless, I appreciate you didn't shut the door on me. So
my paycheck has your name on it, Alex, so I can't say no to you. We'll be back next week with or without Alex. I don't know if I'll allow him back on, but with or without Alex, we'll be back next week with browser-based, I think, if I remember it right,
Yeah,
which makes a browser for agents, basically. So that should be really interesting. We'll pick up this conversation there. If you want to join us live, we'll be on YouTube. You can find us there. Just search for The New Stack and you'll find it. And with that, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Antje. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks.
Thanks, Frederic. Thanks, Antje.
Thank you all.